So let's consider now moving on to level 3 techniques, where the goal is to change people's beliefs. This is, in many people's minds, soft and squishy. It has little to do, they think, with data and analysis. Level 3 techniques include clarifying a purpose or a cause, clarifying vision, clarifying the quality of value added by a particular approach. It plays on emotional connections so that people see something and maybe they feel a connection or a disconnection. They feel closer or farther. They feel an identity and a membership, or not. And these include things like music, symbols, flags, visual images, audio sounds that will play on people's underlying assumptions about the way the world is or should be. And for many people, this is a matter of identity. I am French, and therefore I am Saudi Arabian, and therefore I am American, and therefore they believe in certain ways. So it's a challenge to think about, okay, which of these approaches would make more sense? If you look at the world, you'll see that level 1 techniques are frequently employed in military organizations. We also see it widely used in for-profit corporate organizations. You'll see level 2 techniques commonly employed in university and research organizations where data and charts and statistics are king of the day. And you'll frequently see level 3 techniques employed in nonprofit organizations, pick your favorite one, and in religions. So if we begin now to think about what's the connection between the techniques that we employ and the kind of buy-in we get, that is the consequence or the results of our efforts to lead, well, in my experience, that even though we can identify these in organizations around the world as I've described, and even though we would acknowledge that, say from a military organization's point of view, if we can change what people do, maybe we can change what they think and what they believe. From a nonprofit organization point of view, if we can capitalize on what people believe, maybe we can change how they think and therefore what they do. Let's acknowledge that there is movement, there is influence between and among these 3 levels. So if you use these various clusters of techniques in different proportions, one question would be, what's your particular profile? Do you tend to rely on level 1 more than level 2 and level 3? Or do you tend to rely on level 3 at the expense of level 2, or vice versa? And one of the ways to think about this is to reflect on your language. So we often use bits of language that unintentionally might encourage or discourage other people to listen to what we have to say. For example, many people will say, I agree with everything you've said, John, but, and then we all know what's happening. And the word but actually means I don't agree with everything you've just said. So one of the ways that you can increase your ability to influence others is to pay attention, to be self-aware of your habitual phrases, your habitual speech. And you might consider, for example, eliminating your buts and replacing them with ands. Because when you use but, you're creating a conflict situation. You could make the same point, I agree with everything you've said, John, and I still don't see how we're going to get there. So notice in the second part, I'm speaking in the first person, not the second person. In other words, instead of saying, John, you have a problem, I'm acknowledging the truth that you see and acknowledging that I still don't understand how that's going to help us accomplish. This little change will tend to build a higher social quotient. It'll tend to build a higher sense of camaraderie or working together than if you use but, which tends to create, okay, now it's in a conflict situation, my truth is going to win out over your truth. I also encourage you not to disguise your opinions as questions. For example, I might say, Mary, don't you think that's a good idea? And when I say, don't you think that's a good idea, what's actually happening is I am putting you on the spot. Don't you think that's right? Now, the listener all of a sudden is the spotlight of attention. The listener must decide, okay, am I going to agree with this person? Are they trying to lead me someplace I really don't want to go? Or do I have the freedom to respond? Now, many people will say these are details, and you're exactly right. They are details. Tiny little details that put a little bit of influence here, a little bit of influence there, and cumulatively, in cumulation, they will create a tone to either be more bought into what the other person's saying or to be less so. So don't disguise your opinions as questions. Have the courage to acknowledge my belief is ABC. I think that. Thirdly, you might think about giving invitations rather than giving orders. So if we agree that obligation dissipates energy, I don't want to tell somebody to do something. I might acknowledge their choice, make sure that they understand they have a choice by making invitations instead. We need to have a more accurate balance sheet, Bob. I invite you to pay attention to the details to make sure that our balance sheet is accurate, because if we don't have an accurate balance sheet, we get in trouble with the IRS, we get in trouble with our investors, we get in trouble with our accounting firm and so forth. Many of you will shrink at this. It'll be a VABE abrasion because you believe in a leadership role. It's your job to give instructions. It's your job to tell people what to do. It's your job, and you don't have time for the little courtesy, the little nuance of the difference between giving an order, making a demand, giving an instruction, versus making an invitation to participate in what I'm asking you to do. But that little bit of courtesy between telling somebody to do something and inviting them, asking them to do something, can go a long way. Now, if your subordinates have been trained in a different world, if they've been conditioned through boot camp or through their upbringing in their community, that's weak or soft, might not work there. So then you have to decide, okay, is this going to be appropriate with the culture in which I'm working? Let me also invite you to pay attention to the buy-in level below the surface. We've talked about that before. Can you tell from people's signals where they are on the 7-point buy-in scale? You'll be able to do that if you remember that leadership's about managing energy, first in yourself and then in others. So if you are deeply committed, if you are bought into the thing you're asking people to do, they are likely to sense that and respond. So as you begin thinking about your ability to influence others and how you sell your story, I invite you to be aware of the proportion with which you use level 1 techniques, level 2 techniques, and level 3 techniques, because they each have a different response, and it in part will depend on who your audience is, who the other person is that you're trying to influence, but will also depend on your own assumptions about how you should influence people. Pay attention to that proportion and observe what kind of responses you get from others.